Hi everyone, this is Professor Fisher and this is the part 2 of the Lab 8 tutorial. In the last tutorial I just kind of reminded everybody to make sure you go back through the Lab 8 lessons and make sure that you download and try each of those. Okay, so in this lesson, what I'd like to do, or this tutorial, is for those of you that are struggling with how to get started, I wanted to maybe give you some hints on how to get started. And I definitely don't have everything set up in here, so there's a lot for you to do, but I think it's maybe helpful to at least get a little bit of it up and running for those of you that maybe haven't worked with GUI applications before. Okay, so here is the image that we're trying to achieve for our final product. And we can see that there's two panels, left and right. The left has a series of rows and columns. It has 5 rows and 2 columns. In each of those, on the left, we have a label, first name, last name, a label for age. Below that, we have a button that is the GPA that shows 0.0 to start. And we have a button that it says message on it, and it will actually just display a message. And then on the right-hand side of the left-hand panel is a text box. We have 2 text fields so that we can enter in the first name and last name. Then we're using a JSlider, and we have a GPA calculator, which should call the random number generator to randomly calculate a new GPA, and we have the OK button. On the right-hand side, we are going to show the student information and the GPA assessment. And if I scroll down a little bit further, definitely take some time to read through the requirements and ask questions if something's not clear. It talks about the layout, it talks about the content, and the listening requirements. So for my tutorial today, I only have the Action Listener implemented on the right panel, which is under listening requirements. It says the OK button has to be listened in the right panel. This means that the right panel will implement the Action Listener and it will be used when the OK button is pressed. So I'm leaving for you to actually implement the second part of that, the listener for the GPA button, which is going to be on the left-hand panel. And then it gives you some test scenarios. So you want to read through those so you know what you have to look for when you're coding your application. All right, so for right now, I'm going to concentrate on when the OK button is pressed, the student information is displayed in the big button on the right panel. And I'm not going to actually assess the GPA. I'm going to leave that for you to work on. And let me scroll down a little bit, and I didn't add any error handling yet. So if the user doesn't type in a first name or last name, I didn't do that as well. All right, let me bring NetBeans over into my window here. Here we go. And so what I have here is the Lab 8 startup, which was available in the lab activity. So you want to start with that. So I didn't create the app here. This is just exactly as it was when I downloaded it. I did add a student.java. Now I created a new student.java, but you can use the one that you've been using. Just want to make sure you look through it. It should have the first name, the last name, the age, the GPA, and it should also have a way to randomly calculate a new GPA. All right, so next let's go to the control panel because that will be, oh, actually, I'm sorry, mainframe. Mainframe, again, is exactly as it was when I downloaded it from the starter. So I won't go through that too much. It has the Mac layout set up, which is nice. If you could include that, that would really help me because I'm running a Mac. And sometimes when I run your programs, if it doesn't have this, I can't see what you've done and I have to go back in and edit it. So that would be great. All right, let's move on to the control panel. All right, so far, and again, this is not the complete solution here, but I wanted to give you some help here. So it does automatically, if you look at the starter package, it has the right panel and left panel defined, and it says it needs a layout. So I added a grid layout, which has 1 row and 2 columns because this is for the panels. So that way I can put 1 panel on the left and 1 panel on the right. I did actually add a horizontal gap for my borders to try and get it to look like the sample that we have in the lab. And then I create a new left panel and a new right panel. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm passing the left panel to the right panel because remember, the right panel needs to be able to listen for the OK button that is defined in the left panel. So like our last activity, we do need to have access to the elements in that panel. And this is the way that I'm doing it, is I'm passing it here. All right, so let's look at the left panel. So in the left panel, again, I don't have everything here, but I started to add my text fields, my labels, my slider, my buttons. And so I have all those listed. And then in the constructor, so far for my left panel, again, because I didn't implement the action listener yet, I'm leaving that for you to do. I'm creating a grid layout that has 4 rows and 2 columns. That will allow me to have all of my fields the way that they're displayed in the lab activity. So the next thing I do is, again, I added a horizontal gap just to have a little bit of space between the boxes, and then I start to define my first name label, my text field, my last name label, my last name text field, my message button, and my OK button. And I'm going to leave the other items for you, especially the slider. I want you to have some practice with that as well, and use the tutorial that's available in the lab. All right, so then I add these, and the order that I add them will be the order that they show up from left to right. So the first name label is going to be first, and then to the right of that will be the text. All right, and so if I go to my right panel now, here I've started to do a little bit more. So in the right panel only has 2 buttons. It has the button that has the student information and the button that has the GPA assessment message. Then I have a left panel that I'm defining because, again, I need access to that within the right panel for the action listener. I'm creating a student object. Then inside the constructor, so when we create our right panel, I am assigning this.lp, which is the left panel defined on line 11, to LP, which comes in from the calling program on line 13. That way, my global variable, the LP variable at the top on line 11, is going to be available for both my action performed method and my get student method. Okay, because I'm going to need to get the information from the left panel to be able to display it in the right panel. So then I have the background and I have the grid layout, and the grid layout for this one is 2 rows and 1 column. And then I added the 2 buttons. And then I added the OK button action listener for the left panel. So lp.okbutton.add action listener, this. Now, if we go down to the action performed method, so I need to check to see on line 33 if the object of the action performed is equal to the OK button from the left panel. So I have obj equals lp.ok button. If that's true, then I'm going to change the left panel message. And I did this just so I could practice updating that message.set text, and I'm going to say OK button was pressed. That's not part of the final version of the lab, but at least that way I know that things are working the way that I wanted them to. I added a method called getStudent because I didn't want to put all of this in my action performed, especially if I need to get student from someplace else as well. So if you go down to getStudent, it's a void method. It doesn't return anything, but it's going to put values into my student object. So I start on line 41 by creating a string variable, fname, and I set that equal to whatever the user typed on the left panel in the first name text box dot get text. And then right below it, I do the same thing for the last name. Make sure you're using LName text, and that should be the name of your text field, not your label. And using those 2 things, I'm creating my new student object. Now you will eventually need to use the JScroll to get the age. I didn't do that yet. I just put in a numeric value for the age. So you want to replace the 15 with whatever the user has set the age scroll bar to. So I'm doing s equals a new student using those 2 variables that I just received from the text and setting the age. And then what I did was I went ahead and set the left panel first name text and the left panel last name text to null, just so that the name isn't still out there after the user hits the OK button. All right, let me show you what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and run this as it is. Okay, and I'm going to bring it over. There we go. All right, so here is the first round of the application that you need to create for Lab 8. And so what I can do is you don't have to have enter first name here. I just did that, but you can leave it as blank. And so if I put in my first name, and if I do the same thing here for my last name, oops, sorry. Oh, what's going on here? There we go. All right, and then at this point, the way that it should work is if I click the OK button, the information should show up in the right panel under Student Info, and the message here should change to OK button was pressed. So let's try that. Okay, these two fields got wiped out. It says OK button was pressed, and over here it says Peggy Fisher. So it looks like it's working. Let me just go back to the right panel. When I printed it out, right here is where I set my button text. I could actually add the age. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and we'll run it again, and I'll just show you that this time it'll show Peggy Fisher is age 15. Yeah, that was a long time ago. But anyways, so that's kind of what you want to do is, let's see, I want to wipe this out, otherwise it'll get the whole thing. So Peggy, there it goes again. Why, I must be in overwrite mode here on my laptop. There we go. There we go. And this time it shows the 15. Obviously you want to clean that up a little bit because it's just putting it right up against my last name. But I hope that this is enough to help you guys get started. If you have any questions when you're working on it, this is a little bit more complicated than some of the other ones. But use what you've learned, use what's available in the lab activity, and just let me know if you need any additional help. I'd be glad to look at any code anybody's struggling with. Remember that in this case, if I need to use the student information at all in the left panel, I'd have to pass that back over to the left panel, but I don't believe we need to do that. Let's just look at our picture here again. No, it doesn't look like we ever need to do that except for this GPA. So we might need to be able to get at the GPA for the student. So you might have to think about that a little bit. But all right, this is the end of the Lab 8 tutorial, and good luck.